Welcome to Mariner's Cove. To the casual eye, it's a postcard, a glittering testament to success and the soothing rhythm of the sea. The kind of place where the water is always impossibly blue and the light catches the polished chrome of fiberglass and steel. But for those of us who live and work here, who have sunk our savings and our sweat into maintaining this fragile bubble, it's a complicated ecosystem. It's a blend of paradise and pettiness, where the serenity of the ocean often clashes violently with the toxic politics of the Homeowners Association. My name is Alex, and this place, this haven, is where my story, or rather, my conflict, begins. My vessel, the Peregrine, is the culmination of nearly 2 decades of grinding, thankless work. She's not just a yacht. She's a tangible piece of my life's narrative. I bought her as a wreck, a beautiful skeleton that everyone else had given up on, and I brought her back to life, fitting her with custom hardware and engines that hum with efficiency. She is, to put it simply, perfect, and in a community driven by superficial flash and rented status, perfection is often mistaken for a challenge. This marina, this seemingly idyllic spot, operates on an unspoken hierarchy, one that the HOA, under the unwavering and frankly terrifying command of Evelyn Thorne, sought to enforce with the zealous ferocity of a high-tide warning. Evelyn Thorne, we all called her Karen, though never to her face. Evelyn was the self-appointed and perpetually re-elected president of the Mariners Cove HOA, a woman who possessed the unnerving ability to weaponize trivialities. For Evelyn, the HOA wasn't about maintaining property values. It was about maintaining her vision of property values. She was an architect of minor chaos, a connoisseur of complaints, capable of transforming a slight discoloration on a dock piling into a full-scale emergency meeting. Her authority, built on a mountain of rules and a bottomless well of free time, cast a long shadow over the docks. The first skirmishes were subtle, a campaign of paper terrorism. I'd come back to my berth after a run or a business call and find them. Small, folded notes tucked neatly under a wiper blade or taped with an industrial-strength adhesive to my cabin door. Always signed the HOA, always carrying the faint, cloying scent of Evelyn's preferred expensive hand cream. The complaints were absurd, yet they carried the weight of officialdom, designed to needle and irritate until compliance was achieved. She targeted the details, the audacious height of my anchor flag, which, according to the marina regulations she herself had helped draft, was precisely within the permitted limits, the excessive sheen of my hull polish, which she claimed created an unnecessary navigational distraction for other boaters. She even once sent a formal notice regarding the unacceptable hue of my fenders, insisting they did not conform to the approved palette of nautical ivory or deep-sea navy. Mine were a practical, durable slate gray. The absurdity was the point. It was a constant reminder that my sanctuary was conditional, that I lived under her capricious eye. I tried the measured approach. I drafted polite, meticulously researched replies, referencing the actual, official HOA bylaws, the ones written before her tenure, and quoting the established regulations of the Coast Guard. I even once included a detailed, signed letter from a maritime surveyor confirming the proper, required height of my anchor flag. The responses were met with silence, followed by a new, equally preposterous complaint. It wasn't about the rules. It was about the war of attrition. She sought to wear me down, to assert that her personal preferences superseded any official document. But Evelyn Thorne wasn't just a paper pusher. She was a stage director. She began to organize mandatory community events, dockside dake or competitions, nautical neighbor mixers, and the annual Mariners Cove Gala. These were less about camaraderie and more about showcasing her own organizational prowess and enforcing her taste. She was the sole judge, the undisputed arbiter of style and community spirit. Those who failed to participate, or worse, failed to conform to her rigid aesthetic, were subject to passive-aggressive shaming and public advisory consultations. When the dockside dake or competition rolled around, I politely, but firmly, declined. The Peregrine is a performance vessel, not a Christmas tree. I wasn't going to taint her classic lines with novelty lights and synthetic garland just to appease Evelyn's appetite for enforced festivity. That refusal, that simple act of independence, was interpreted not as a choice, but as an act of open defiance. She saw my quiet elegance, my self-containment, as a direct challenge to her authority. And in her world, authority was absolute. The feud, which had simmered as an annoying background hum, was about to come to a full, scalding boil. The war of attrition continued, but Evelyn Thorne Karen was not content with simply irritating me from afar. She needed proximity. She needed a reason to invade my space, to physically cross the boundary she saw as merely theoretical. Her solution was a calculated maneuver. She scheduled a series of so-called community vessel inspections, under the guise of ensuring safety and compliance with imaginary aesthetic standards. She began prowling the docks. She approached my yacht, a perfect theatrical performance of official duty. I met her at the gangway, my posture radiating the subtle but firm boundary of private ownership. Her inspection was less about safety and more about probing for weakness. She ran a white-gloved finger along a rail, looking for dust where none existed, and made a performative show of checking my dock lines, even though they were professionally knotted and well-maintained. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice dripping with the condescension of a headmistress, "your fire extinguisher appears to be slightly older than the newest HOA recommended model. While technically compliant, the aesthetic is ... regrettable. We prefer uniform adherence to excellence. It was code for, I don't like your stuff." I simply handed her the up-to-date inspection tag, laminated and clear. She accepted it with a thin, brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. She left with the promise of more inspections to come, clearly frustrated by my preparedness. Her next move, however, was a quantum leap in audacity. The atmosphere at Mariners Cove began to shift. Signs went up announcing the annual HOA Summer Gala, a notorious event designed to showcase Evelyn's social standing more than any sense of community. The invitations were lavish, hinting at an exclusive, must-attend evening. I, of course, intended to be miles away. I had planned a short, solitary cruise, a genuine escape from the suffocating air of the HOA's self-importance. The evening before my departure, I went through my usual pre-sale checklist, double-checking the navigation systems, topping up the fuel, and securing the main hatch. It was then I saw it not the usual passive-aggressive note, but something far more brazen. Taped not to the outside, but to the inside of my main cabin window, clearly visible from the dock. The document was a formal-looking facility use notice. It wasn't a request. It was a statement. It declared that the Peregrine had been selected as the primary venue for the annual HOA Gala, designated as the VIP reception deck. It listed a crew of caterers, florists, and a designated DJ who would be granted access to my vessel between the hours of 3 p.m. and midnight on the night of the event. There was no please, no we hope, only the arrogant, unquestioned authority of we will. The document concluded with a small, printed note from the President, which read, "A small token of appreciation for your generous donation to this year's most anticipated social event. We knew we could count on your community spirit." Alex, my jaw tightened. She had used a master key, or perhaps a fraudulently obtained spare, to gain access to my cabin and post her unilateral decree. It was an act of trespass, a declaration of total ownership. I realized that confronting her immediately would simply give her the dramatic fight she craved. My escape cruise was canceled. I needed a different strategy, one that turned her theatrical self-importance against her. I would let her set the stage. I would let her build her perfect illusion. And then, at the moment of her greatest triumph, I would pull the curtain down, not with anger, but with the cold, hard reality of ownership. I called a discreet friend in the Maritime Police, informing him of a potential unauthorized occupation of my vessel. Then, I locked everything, replaced the cabin lock with a high-security temporary model, and settled into wait. The night of the gala arrived, and I watched the spectacle unfold from the quiet refuge of a rental condo overlooking the marina. The sight was surreal. Evelyn, magnificent and blinding in a sequined gown, was holding court on the main dock. She was directing people, greeting guests, pointing dramatically towards the illuminated bow of the Peregrine, which was now flanked by large floral arrangements. She had convinced herself, and perhaps the entire community, that my yacht was her grand, personal stage. I could see the caterers setting up tables on the foredeck. They must have picked the temporary lock I installed, or perhaps they simply cut through a tether I'd left strategically weak. The party was starting. The illusion was complete, and Evelyn Thorne was about to face the consequences of mistaking a man's property for a woman's playground. The stage was set, and Evelyn Thorne had taken center stage. From my vantage point in the quiet anonymity of the overlooking condo, I watched the culmination of her years of petty tyranny. The dock below was awash in the warm glow of artificial light and the high-pitched, self-congratulatory chatter of the Mariners' Cove elite. It was a spectacle of assumed status, and at its heart, glittering under the string lights, was the Peregrine, my yacht, serving as the involuntary centerpiece. Evelyn, draped in a gown that looked 3 sizes too elaborate for a dock party, stood on the gangway, accepting compliments as if she'd personally manufactured the vessel herself. She was an illusionist, and her greatest trick was convincing everyone, including herself, that her desire translated into ownership. I watched as waiters, hired for the evening, moved across my teak deck with the practiced ease of those working a familiar venue. They were setting up champagne flutes on surfaces I had spent weeks meticulously restoring. This wasn't just a party. It was a physical invasion, a calculated effrontery to the notion of private property. Every laugh, every clink of glass on my deck, was a small drill bit wearing away at my patience. But my timing had to be precise. I wouldn't interrupt the preparation. I would interrupt the pinnacle. When the first large wave of VIP guests had been ushered onto the main deck of the yacht, a group Evelyn had gathered for what was clearly a crucial photo opportunity, I made my descent. The route was carefully chosen, a deliberate approach that minimized warning and maximized impact. I didn't come from the main marina entrance. I approached from the water, docking my runabout quietly at a service berth 100 yards down the dock. I walked toward the party, not with a shout, but with a quiet, purposeful stride that cut through the noise. As I moved closer, the music, a blend of insipid jazz and corporate pop, became louder, but the murmurs of the crowd grew louder still. Evelyn was standing right at the top of the gangway to the Peregrine, holding a microphone, ready to deliver her grand opening toast. She had the rapt attention of her entire court. This was the moment of her zenith, the very peak of her borrowed authority. She raised her free hand for silence, her eyes sweeping over the crowd with a triumphant gleam. Then she saw me, just a man, standing at the edge of the light, slowly, deliberately, approaching her stage. Her smile didn't vanish immediately. Instead, it became stiff, a waxen mask of forced pleasantness. She lowered the microphone, but her voice was still loud enough to carry over the background din. "Well, Alex," she called out, with a calculated edge of dismissiveness designed to put me in my place. "Fancy seeing you here. I'm so glad you decided to join us. You must be so proud of your contribution to the success of the evening." She was attempting to co-opt my presence, to make me a last-minute part of her narrative, a footnote in her grand social triumph. I didn't acknowledge her wave. I didn't acknowledge her forced pleasantries. I kept my gaze steady, focused only on her, and spoke in a voice that was low, serious, and carried the undeniable weight of absolute truth. It was a voice that cut through the bubbly atmosphere like a sonar ping. "Evelyn," I stated, not calling her Karen, but using the full weight of her given name, "I believe you have confused the definition of private property with the concept of public access. This vessel, the Peregrine," I paused, letting the name hang in the air, "is not a community facility. It is my private home." She recovered quickly, attempting to dismiss me with a wave of her hand and an infuriatingly patronizing laugh. "Oh, Alex, darling, don't be so dramatic. We know it's your boat. We're all just enjoying its marvelous hospitality for a few hours. It's a charitable donation. You see, a beautiful gesture for the community fund. I sent you the notice, darling. It's all approved by the board. She was leaning on the ultimate shield of the HOA, the alleged authority of the group, to justify her solo act of trespass. But I knew her game, and I had a piece of evidence that trumped her entire charade. I didn't argue the point of charity or the board. I simply took 2 steps closer, making sure my statement was heard by every person on that deck. Evelyn, let's dispense with the theater. You sent a notice. Yes, but you failed to obtain a crucial element, my permission. I held up the keys, letting the light catch the polished brass of the lanyard. And to clear up any confusion about who is in charge of this vessel and this event, I have to inform you all of something very important. The party is over. Every person currently on this boat, I said, lifting my voice just enough, is currently trespassing on private property, and I will give you 60 seconds to clear the deck before I call the maritime authorities and file a formal report against every one of you for unauthorized occupation. The noise in the marina did not simply stop, it died. The sound of breaking glass would have been quieter than the sudden, absolute silence that fell over Evelyn Thorne's annual summer gala. 60 seconds. That's how long I gave them. 60 seconds for Evelyn Thorne's meticulously crafted world of delusion to crumble around her. The silence I had created was deafening, thicker than the marina fog, and far more powerful than any music she could have played. Every eye was on me, but the most important gaze, the one I sought to break, was Evelyn's. Her face, moments ago a canvas of triumph, was now a frightening study in cognitive dissonance. She couldn't reconcile the opulent reality she had engineered with the harsh, cold command I had issued. She was paralyzed, not by fear, but by the sheer, public humiliation of having her authority nullified. Finally, she found her voice, a shrill, strained sound that lacked its usual polish. This is outrageous, Alex. Unacceptable. You cannot do this. This is a community event. The board approved the location. She gestured wildly toward the guests, attempting to rally them, to turn the crowd against the intruder. Me. I didn't raise my voice to meet her hysteria. I simply took a step closer to the gangway, the keys still dangling from my fingers, a cold, metallic reminder of absolute ownership. Evelyn, the board did not approve this. You approved this, alone. And for the benefit of everyone here, let me clarify something. The board does not have the authority to unilaterally seize and utilize private property for a social gathering. This yacht, the vessel you are currently standing beside, is titled in my name alone. I hold the registration, the insurance, and the physical keys. I let the keys swing slightly, a mesmerizing pendulum of power. The revelation hit her court harder than it hit her. The guests' lawyers, doctors, business owners understood the weight of the word trespassing. They knew the difference between an HOA rule and a criminal complaint. Within seconds, the movement from the yacht's deck turned into an orderly, desperate scramble. The elite of Mariners Cove were now a line of frantic people trying to disembark before the clock ran out. It was a beautiful, chaotic stampede of entitlement running into the wall of reality. They abandoned their glasses, their canapes, and most importantly, they abandoned Evelyn. She watched her audience flee, her gaze flickering between the retreating backs and the pristine deck of the Peregrine. Her face was a master class in slow-motion emotional collapse. Shock melted into confusion, which instantly hardened into a desperate, grasping fury. She turned to me, her voice now a venomous hiss, abandoning all pretense of civility. You are ruining my event, Alex. You are deliberately trying to shame me. You have no community spirit. I'll have you sanctioned. I'll have you removed from the marina. Her threats were paper tigers. And now, for the true climax, I delivered the final, crushing blow, the piece of information she had conveniently, or perhaps deliberately, overlooked. I reached into my pocket and produced a second document, thicker and more official looking than the yacht registration. I held it out toward her, not offering it, but displaying it for the surrounding guests who were still watching the unfolding disaster. Evelyn, I said, the sound of her name now carrying the full weight of judgment. You want to talk about being removed from the marina. You should have read the fine print on the property deed you bought last year. You see, the person you have been harassing for the last 2 years over fender colors and anchor flags. That person, Me, Alex Miller, is not just the owner of the Peregrine. I am also the single largest majority shareholder in the Mariners Cove Marina Corporation itself. I own 80% of the dockage rights, the land you're standing on, and a controlling interest in the very entity that employs your HOA. I watched as the full realization of the magnitude of her error registered on her face. The look was priceless. It was the face of a queen realizing she had just declared war on the king. The silence returned, deeper and more complete than before. Evelyn Thorne, the queen of the HOA, the self-appointed guardian of Mariners Cove, had spent 2 years attempting to dictate terms to her landlord. Her power, her authority, her entire persona in this community was built on a foundation of sand, and with 3 sentences, I had washed it away. I didn't need to threaten her with the HOA. I was the HOA, or rather, I controlled the entire playing field her little game was being played upon. It was over. The party was not merely ruined. Her reign was officially, spectacularly ended. The air that night was different. It wasn't the festive warmth of a party. It was the chilling, clinical silence that follows an unavoidable reckoning. As the last embarrassed guest slunk away, Evelyn Thorne remained, a statue carved from a block of frozen shame, alone on the vast, empty dock. The party lights, which moments before had symbolized her glittering authority, now served only to illuminate her complete and utter defeat. I didn't need to speak to her again. I had said everything that needed to be said. My job was done. I simply walked past her, my steps measured and deliberate, and climbed aboard the Peregrine. The first order of business was reclaiming my space. I methodically secured the temporary lock I had installed, then began the quiet, cathartic process of removing the invasive presence of her gala. Streamers were pulled down, balloons deflated, and the lingering smell of cheap floral arrangements was scrubbed from the deck. It took hours, long after the last party light was extinguished, and the marina returned to its natural, somber quiet. The destruction she had caused was only superficial, but the principle behind it was deep. She hadn't just used my yacht. She had tried to erase my ownership, but with every piece of discarded tinsel and every scrub of the teak, I was reasserting my right to this sanctuary. It was a personal ritual, a silent declaration that the boundary had been violently crossed, and now it was being ruthlessly reinforced. The days that followed saw the inevitable, necessary fallout. News travels fast in a small, close community, and the story of the HOA president attempting to commandeer the largest shareholder's yacht for her party became marina legend overnight. There was no need for sanctions. The public humiliation was a far more potent weapon. Her authority, which had depended entirely on the perception of power, evaporated instantly. She was no longer the intimidating queen. She was the woman who had made a catastrophic, fundamental error in judgment. Within the week, the HOA board convened an emergency, unscheduled meeting. They didn't need me to issue a formal directive. The evidence was the empty yacht, the humiliated guests, and the stark reality of the marina's ownership structure. Evelyn Thorne was quietly, efficiently, and permanently stripped of her presidency. She attempted a defense, of course, clinging to the shredded remnants of her rules, but her voice now lacked the terrifying conviction it once held. Her tyranny was over, ended not by rebellion, but by a simple, unassailable truth. She wasn't as important as she thought she was. As for me, the victory was quiet but profound. It wasn't about revenge. It was about sovereignty. My act had redrawn the lines of ownership in Mariners Cove, clarifying for everyone that private property, even in a shared community, is inviolable. The passive-aggressive notes stopped. The inspections vanished. The dockside dake or competition was immediately and permanently canceled. My yacht, the Peregrine, once again rested in her berth, not just as a possession, but as a monument to a boundary successfully defended. That night, as I watched the sunset over the quiet, unpoliced waters, I realized the true cost of entitlement. Evelyn Thorne's face, in that final moment of realization, the shock of recognizing that the rules she had so aggressively used to control others were meaningless against the actual foundation of power that was the payment. It was a grim lesson, learned publicly, and etched into the history of Mariners Cove, My sanctuary was reclaimed, the queen deposed, and the silence of the sea was finally, genuinely, peaceful once more.